Hello students, welcome to Smart World, a school of complete education. Today we are going to learn the subject English, chapter 2.4, The Fall of Troy. Warming up. Building a story. Form groups of 8. The group leader prepares slips of paper for each of the 7 points given below and distributes them among the others. The group sits in a circle, taking their seat according to the number on the slip they have. Then each one completes the sentence on his or her slip without sharing it with others. The group leader collects the slips and reads all the sentences aloud as one continuous passage. Does the story make sense? The group then works on the story to make it more meaningful and interesting. This game may be played again and again, changing the groups to form new stories. The example is given below, like 1. There was a dash. 2. Who lived in a dash. 3. He or she ate dash. 4. She or he went dash. 5. There she or he saw dash. 6. She or he was dash. 7. That is why dash. Interviews. A. Why? Form groups of 5. Choose a similar character from any one of the epics you know. One person from the group plays the role of that character. Others in the group frame questions related to the character's life. The condition is that all the questions should begin with why. They interview the character using these why questions. Practice and present the interview in the classroom. B. How? Follow the above procedure. Now all questions should begin with how. C. Prepare a short script of your interviews. Here is a short story, The Fall of Troy, Part 1. Epics are long poems and relate to the deeds of a great national hero or a great national war. They often tell of a nation's early history. They may be composed and sung or recited for many years before they are actually written down. Two famous Sanskrit scripts epics are the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And two great epics of the European literature written in ancient Greek are the Iliad and the Odyssey. Just as in Indian literature we go back to stories from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, so in the literature of Western countries they go back to the Iliad and the Odyssey. Just as children all over India know the names of the stories of Ram and Sita, Yudhishthir and Arjuna and Draupadi, so children in the Western countries know the names of Hector, Odysseus, Achilles, and Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world, because of whom the Greek and Trojans fought for 10 long years. Nobody knows for certain who the author of these early epics is. It is thought that they arose and developed with the nation itself, and were handed down from singer to singer till perhaps one great poet gave them their final form. It is believed that the Iliad and the Odyssey were composed and recited by a blind poet named Homer, who lived about 900 BC and who wandered from one Greek city or village to another, singing his poems to all who would receive him in their homes and give him hospitality. This wandering singer has been honored through the ages not only in Greece but in all Europe as the father of European poetry. The Iliad is the story of Ilium or Troy, a rich trading city in Asia Minor near the narrow sea that leads to the Aegean or the Black Sea. It was well situated both for commerce and agriculture. In front of the city was a sea over which sailed the ships of Troy carrying goods and grain. Here are a few questions for the story recited till now. First, how many epics transmitted from generation to generation? Have you seen any of these stories in TV serials or movies? Who are considered to be the authors of epics Ramayana and Mahabharata respectively? Why is Homer honored with the title of Father of European Poetry? Let's continue with the story now. At the back rose the high peak of Mount Ida, from which flowed many rivers and streams. The valleys among the hills were well watered and fertile, with corn growing in fertile fields and cattle feeding on rich grass of the meadows, while sheep fed on the slopes of the hills. Round the city, the Trojans had built a great wall so that no enemy could attack them from the sea. The wall was so broad that people could stand and sit and walk on it. The great gate stood open, and people could go to the seashore outside and come in as they pleased. But in time of war, the gates would be closed, and then the city would look like a strong fortress, quite safe from all attack, protected by walls surrounding it as well as by the hills behind. Thus, Troy was a strong city, strongly protected by its walls and strongly defended by its brave soldiers. But all the kings and heroes of Greece had declared war against the Trojans because Paris, a prince of Troy, had persuaded Helen, the wife of a Greek king Menelaus, to elope with him. He had brought her to Troy. The Greeks wanted to take revenge on Troy for the wrong done to Menelaus. They sailed to Troy and laid siege to the city. The Trojans too fought hard and the siege continued for 10 long years. The fighting went on daily, but the siege did not end. On the on the one hand, the Greeks could not take the city, and on the other hand, the Trojans could not force them to sail away. Every day, the Trojans came out of the gates, and the Greeks came out of the tents and ships, and the fighting went on. Sometimes there were great battles between the two armies. Sometimes there were single fights between the two great horses. Sometimes the Trojans had better of it, and sometimes the Greeks. But the fighting still went on. Great horses on both sides were killed in the course of the war. After leading the defense in the city for 9 years, the brave Hector was at last killed by Achilles, whom none could resist. But Achilles himself was killed later on by a poisoned arrow that entered his heel, the only part of the body where he could be wounded. Still later, Paris himself was killed also by a poisoned arrow. The Trojans were tired of being shut up in the city, and the Greeks were longing to see their homes again. But still, the fighting went on. Let's answer a few questions from the passage above. First, how did the location of Troy help it to grow in a very rich, prosperous city? How were Trojans protected during wartime? What was the cause of the 10-year-old war between Greeks and Trojans? Find the story of why Helen was persuaded by goddess Aphrodite to elope with Paris. English Workshop 1. Read the passage and name the following. A. He composed the Iliad and Odyssey. Who is he? He persuaded Helen to elope with him. Who is he? C. She was the wife of King Menelaus. Who was she? D. He led the defense of Troy for 9 years. Who was he? E. He was killed by a poisoned arrow that entered his heel. Who was he? 2. Find antonyms from the passage of the following words. The antonym of barren is. The antonym of offended is dash. The antonym of cowardly is dash. The antonym of peace is dash. The antonym of surrender is dash. The antonym of exposed is dash. The antonym of defenseless is dash. 3. From other sources, find synonym of the following words used in the story. A. Great hero. B. Beautiful woman. C. Fight. Verb. D. Rich city. C. Safe. F. Strong city. G. Brave. 4. Correct the following sentences using the facts from the passage. A. Troy traded in cattle and grass with other cities. B. During wars, Trojans jumped over the fort gates to fight the enemy. C. Helen eloped with Menelaus. D. Troy was attacked because it was a strong, rich city. E. The Greek armies and heroes always defeated the Trojans. F. Both the enemies were eager to continue fighting. G. The great heroes avoided one another. H. Achilles was killed by an arrow that pierced his heart. 5. State the counter action for the following actions. A. Action. A. Helen eloped with Paris. What is the counter action? B. The Greeks sailed to Troy and attacked it. What is the counter action for this? C. Hector was killed by Achilles. What is the counter action for this? D. The siege continued for 10 long years. What is the counter action for this? From either of the question number 6. From either of the two Indian epics, find out which battle or war lasted the longest. Write down about the cause, the enemies, armies, its heroes, its duration, and the final outcome. You have to write the cause, enemy armies, heroes, duration, and the final outcome. Question number 7. Complete the following sentences with reference to the passage. A. Epics are long poems that dash. B. They may be composed and sung or recited for many years before dash. C. Nobody knows for certain who dash. D. It is believed that dash Homer, who dash and who dash to all who dash. At the Question number E. At the back rose the high peak of Mount Ida from which dash. Underline the clauses in the above sentences and also the words that link or connect the clauses. Now students, let's move to the part 2 of the story. So it goes this way. At last Troy was taken not by force but by a trick. It was the cunning Odysseus who thought of a plan to obtain the victory. Let us build a great wooden horse, he said, big enough to hold men inside it, and let some of our best fighters hide in the horse. Then let us burn our tents and pretend to sail away from in our ships. But instead of sailing away, we'll return in the night. When the Trojans are asleep, we'll attack the city and burn and kill. The Greek leaders decided to follow the advice of the wise Odysseus. So, a great horse of wood was made by a skillful engineer, and the greatest heroes Menelaus, Odysseus himself, and others entered it. The last man to go and bring the architect himself, who knew the secret of opening and shutting the entrance. That evening, the Greeks burned their tents and sailed away in their ships, but they did not go very far. Only one man was left behind to persuade the Trojans to track the horse in the city. Next day, the Trojans woke up expecting to go out and fight as they had done for the past 10 years. What delight and surprise they felt as the sight they saw on the seashore outside the walls. It seemed that the long siege was over at last. The tents had been burned, the shore was deserted, the Greek ships had all gone. It's peace at last, they cried, and opened wide their gates and came out in large numbers on the plain, glad to be free again to go where they pleased. Then they saw on the sands the huge wooden horse. They gathered round it in astonishment, for it was indeed a wonderful piece of work. As they were wondering how the horse had been built and why it had been left behind, they found a Greek on his hands tied together lying under it. When the Trojans dragged him out, the man pretended to be very frightened of them. When he was commanded to tell them why the Greeks had gone and why they had left the horse behind, he pretended to tremble very much and refused to speak. When at last they threatened to kill him, he spoke and told them his false tale. Here are a few questions of the story till now. How did Odysseus plan to defeat the Trojans? What was the reason for Troy to rejoice and celebrate? Think and answer the following. Was it enough to use the wooden horse to hide? What was done to make the Trojans take it inside the city? Now let's continue with the story further. The Greeks were tired for a long war and sailed away in their ships, he said, but they are afraid of the long voyage home too. So they have made this horse and left it as an offering to the god of the sea. They wanted also to kill me and offer me as a sacrifice to the good sea god, but I escaped and hid from them. But why did Greeks make such a huge horse? Some of the Trojans asked, and the cunning Greek made his reply, if they had made a smaller offering, you might have taken it into your city. Then the luck would have gone to the Trojans and not to the Greeks. That is why they made it too big to go inside your gates. The Trojans were delighted to hear this. The Greeks have gone, they said, and the walls are no longer necessary. Let's make a hole into the wall and drag the horse in. The wise priest warned them not to do so. It may be a trick that will ruin us, he said. You will bring disaster on the city if you break down the walls. But they were so excited that they paid no attention to his words. They broke down part of the strong wall in order to drag the horse in. All that day the Trojans feasted and drank and celebrated. After all the celebrations, they went to sleep and slept soundly. But the day of rejoicing was soon followed by a night of terror and death. The Greek ships had not sailed far. As soon as they were hidden by an island, they had lowered their sails and dropped the anchor and waited for the night. In the darkness, the fleet sailed back, and leading the ship, which was Aegemon's, bore a red light high on its mast. The Greek, who was watching for the return of the fleet, crept to the wood horse and gave signal. The side of the horse opened, the Greeks climbed out and opened the gates. The whole Greek army entered the sleeping city. Immediately the Greeks set fire to the houses and towers and palaces and began to burn and kill. Let's answer a few questions till now. How did the cunning Greek explain the presence of such a large wooden horse? Do you think Greeks and Trojans were superstitions? Give reasons for your answer. What reckless, thoughtless step did Trojans take? How did the Greeks enter the city of Troy? How did the Greek ship remain hidden from Troy? Now let's continue with the story. Troy was filled with the sight of leaping flames and the sounds of shouting and the noise of weapons and the cries of weeping women. The sleeping Trojans sprang out of their beds, but they were taken by surprise. The enemies were right inside the walls, and many of the Trojans were killed before they could put on their armor and seize their weapons. A bright light lit up the sky as palaces and houses, temples, and towers went up in flames. The Trojans fought as well as they could, but it was all in vain. Old King Priam was killed with all his brave sons. Hector's wife and his old mother and sisters were carried off as slaves by the conquerors. Their fate was in contrast to Helen's when King Menelaus rushed through the city, looking for her and found her in a palace. She hung her head in shame and sorrow as she faced her former husband. Her voice was choked with emotion and she could not speak. But Menelaus forgave her and she went back with him, for it was the only Aphrodite who had turned her heart away from her home and her husband and her child. When morning came, nothing was left of the proud rich city that had resisted attack for 10 years. Here are a few questions. What distressing sounds and sights could be witnessed at Troy that fateful night? What was the destiny of the royal family of Troy and that of Helen? Think and answer the following. How could the fall of Troy have been avoided? English workshop. First, find and write the Greek and Trojan names used in the story, part 1 and part 2. 2. List all the words related to war from both parts of the story. 3. Note the following constructions carefully and then use them to express your ideas. A horse big enough, which is in bold, to hold men inside it. Dash enough to dash. B. The Greeks were tired of the long war. Tired of is in bold. C. They are afraid of the long voyage home. 2. Afraid of is in bold. D. They make it too big to go inside your city. Too big to go inside is in bold. D. They were so excited that they paid no attention to his words. So excited that is in bold. Question number 4. Put the following events in order in which they took place. Number them accordingly. There are events listed from A to L. You have to number the events according to the sequence. A. The Trojan found a Greek man under the big wooden horse. B. They broke down part of the wall and brought the horse in. C. The cunning Odysseus thought of a plan. D. The Greeks burned their tents and sailed away. E. Troy was burned down. F. The Greeks built a big wooden horse. G. The great horses hid inside the horse. H. The priests warned the Trojans not to break the wall. I. The Trojans were happy to see the Greek ships go. J. The Trojans slept soundly. K. The Greek came out of the horse and opened the gates. L. The Greek army entered the city. 5. Form pairs. Imagine you are a pair of Trojans and you have come to know about Odysseus' plan. Make the counter plan to defeat the Greeks. Write down your plan as you would explain it to your fellow Trojans. Question number 6. Identify one paragraph example of a main clause and one example of a dependent clause from page number 46. Read the entry regarding clause in language study pages. Question number 7. Be a writer. A. Now read the beginning and end of the sci-fi story given below and complete the story using your imagination. The magic glasses. After 10 years of diligent experimenting on light, Giant, a brilliant scientist, created a pair of eyeglasses which would enable him to see through all opaque objects, doors, walls, metal constructions, etc. On Monday, he put on his magic glasses and stepped into the busy street outside. Dash. You have to complete the story now. The story ends this way. And so Jayant received the state award for brave citizen. And you have to create an ending for the scene. Task B. Read the following and observe the use of tense. Last week I witnessed a strange accident. Let me tell you about it. The signal flashes green. Vehicles start from opposite direction. They move fast. Suddenly a speeding motorcyclist tries to cut across from the wrong side. He is about to collide with a loaded truck. He applies the brakes, he falls and slides out of his bike and under the truck. He comes out unshattered on the other side. When an event which has occurred in the past is narrated in the present tense to create a dramatic effect, its tense is called dramatic present tense. Now try to relate giant sci-fi story in brief in a dramatic past tense. Thank you.